Hello, and welcome to this South by Southwest conversation hosted by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, a national foundation helping to support informed and engaged communities. Today, our democracy is facing an existential challenge posed by the spread of misinformation and conspiracies online. These phenomena are not new, but at the scale of the internet, they're also not easily studied or well understood. Knight's own research done in partnership with Gallup has shown that Americans are worried about how misinformation is impacting our nation's democratic processes. We found that more than 80% of Americans believe they were exposed to misinformation during the 2020 campaign. And even more troubling, 60% of Americans think that misinformation swayed the outcome of the election. Given the depth of concern, the mob scene we saw on January 6th was perhaps an inevitable outcome, an inflection point where online conspiracies and disinformation came to life and explosively collided with reality in the halls of Congress. Today, we can see more and more evidence of online conspiracies fueling offline actions. We know social media provided powerful organizing and amplification tools that, when weaponized by bad actors, undermine the integrity of our information systems and our democracy. Right now, there's a leadership vacuum. Regulators and industry leaders have been hesitant to take decisive action, leaving it to researchers and journalists to reveal the scope of the problem and to prompt conversations about accountability. We're joined by renowned scholar and two of the most respected journalists covering the disinfo and conspiracy beat today. Dr. Joan Donovan, the research director at the Shorenstein Center at Harvard University, and NBC News reporters Ben Collins and Brandy Zadrozny. Thanks to you all for joining us. Here we go. So on January 6th, we witnessed a coordinated attack on the United States Capitol that by most accounts was organized online and via mainstream social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, as well as anonymous message boards and fringe platforms like Gab and Parler. This was the real world culmination of months or even years of online rhetoric, organization, and viral mis and disinformation. How did we get here? What led us to this event, and specifically what trends unfolding online that you've been observing in the various digital spaces you study and report on?
It's hard to say exactly the moment that led us to the Capitol. I think I hate to use the analogy because it's based in a false idea, but the frog boiling. I think Ben and I know Joan have been sort of seeped in this space for the last about a decade. And so we've sort of seen violence aimed at all kinds of different people of color and women and et cetera, throughout the years. And so to see an online group radicalized, ending in real world harm, well, we've witnessed little pieces of that throughout the years. Like, that's not sort of new. I think what was new this year is that sort of instead of little niche pockets of fringe extremists or fringe trolls, what we saw was just half of America seemed to get radicalized really, really quickly. So for us, it was in, I would say, March, where all of the online spaces we watched, the QAnon spaces, the malicious spaces, the anti-vaccination spaces, like they just grew, like I'm talking like tenfold in terms of membership, in terms of activity. We were seeing these groups, they just like burst in conversation. And when you have communities that grow that exponentially, you're going to have an exponential growth, although much smaller, of people who are willing to take the fight offline, of people who are willing to actually engage in violent activity. And so we saw that in drips and drabs throughout the year at the anti-lockdown protests, like specifically and famously, we all saw in the impeachment hearings in Michigan, where people stormed the Capitol, where some Boogaloo boys had a plot to kidnap the governor. We saw it in the summer where Black Lives Matter protesters were sort of threatened by militias, there to battle Antifa, which is a huge bit of disinformation lobbed by the president. Then we saw it in the Stop the Steal movement, which was also based on disinformation, thrown out by the president himself. And so we saw that violence continue with the Proud Boys on the streets of Washington. And so the day at the Capitol, I mean, it was inevitable that was going to happen. Ben and I were on speakerphone, just holding our breaths, waiting for it to happen. And then it did.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, running a research team that has been the boiling frog, we, knew it was coming, saw it coming, did everything we could, just like Brandy and Ben did, to raise any kind of alarm bells. But it starts to feel a lot like you're Chicken Little out there when you're trying to get people to understand that things are getting worse, because things are already quite bad. But for me, the big moment of no return was December 12th. There was a protest in DC. The conclusion of the rally was a Stop the Steal rally. And like Brandy described, it was a big tent coalition. So you saw InfoWars hanging out with Roger Stone, talking to the Proud Boys, who were talking to Nick Fuentes, who's, rhetoric has now become part of the impeachment trial. All of these different groups, all of these social media influencers, whatever you want to call them, but for me, they're networked factions, came together, and at the end of the night, they did something really, truly reflective of their character, which is they stole Black Lives Matter banners from churches and burned them. And the optics of it were quite lame and boring, like they couldn't get the banner to light. They're trying to figure out, how to make it, look more fantastic and more of a spectacle, but it just really, like, the banners just really didn't catch fire in the way that they had hoped. But I was watching alongside, tens of thousands of other people live on the internet as they were trying to do this. And it reflected all of the optics of the Klan that the alt-right tried to reflect in 2017 with the Unite the Right rally and the Torch March. But when there was no justice, when there was no follow through, when there was no arrest, until, of course, Taro tried to go back to DC and there was an arrest the day before Stop the Steal, or maybe 2 days before Stop the Steal, the January 6th event. It just showed me that there was going to be a lack of seriousness on the part of our government institutions. And what was confounding to me, though, as a researcher, was the GOP didn't realize that this wasn't their base. They thought in some way that this group of people were interested in them succeeding, when in fact, Trump was really a cudgel, or as Bannon has called him, kind of a blunt tool by which they were trying to bring, for some of them, a race war, for Christian white nationalists, a religious war, a religious holy war. For others, the chaos, just, the lulls. But all of that sentiment and all of that taken together, I think you'd only get that kind of toxic mix, like showing up in violence, when you neglect to do things time and time again that would prevent it from getting so big. Which is to say that the, FBI, CIA, all of our alphabet agencies are, of course, implicated, but more so, I think our technology platforms and the stewards of them really put the country at risk by allowing this to scale beyond control.
I want to talk a little bit more about that, Joan. Can you, like, you've basically just implicated technology companies and social media platforms in all this. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the role you see those companies playing. The role that they played up through January 6th, but also the role that they're playing right now.
All right, I'm going to take off my conspiracy lenses so that I can see the world a little bit more clearly. But I agree with you.
Okay.
I would say that, the technology companies themselves do need, they do need to be made responsible. And the problem is the laws that we've grown up with don't do that. And so now where we're at in terms of responsibility and accountability is exactly where we shouldn't be, which is every other industry is trying to clean up the mess. And one of the industries that has shouldered the burden of accountability and responsibility for the mess made by tech is, our friends here at NBC who've, it's nice to have a job. It's terrible to have a job when you are watching the world burn and you know who the arsonists are. And there's the only thing you can do is point the finger over and over and over again and show that this is a pattern. Now, as a sociologist showing patterns, that's our job. But journalists don't like to write the same story 100 times to prove the point, which is to say that the reason why you end up with a beat is because there are repeated patterns of behavior. And so I think our tech journalists have really done an enormous service in ensuring that like accurate information is circulating, but at the same time they're at war with and harassed by those that they have to cover. And for me, there's so many different kinds of harms that are created by misinformation at scale, where if platform companies were to take it seriously as an effect of their products, we could all do better together. But I think that in some ways it would actually free up some of our journalists to do a much more satisfactory reporting instead of the necessary reporting that they're doing.
Yeah, I just want to stress what Joan said. I think that there are so many conversations we should be having about how the world works that we can't have because we are constantly fighting with liars who lie for profit. And I don't just mean we, as in Brandy and I mean the world. We are constantly in arguments on Facebook, with family members and friends, in Instagram, in real life now because of stuff that was seen on YouTube, about basic facts that have been established. And we are arguing over that instead of trying to move the ball forward with what actually needs to be done. It prevents true conversations about things like aid, how to get our cities back on track, and important conversations that we have to have. And instead, we're talking about if the Earth is round. Quite literally, now we're talking about if the Earth is round. A couple of years ago, Brandy wrote a story. I randomly came across it today, but Brandy wrote a story about how there was this shift to groups from Facebook, and Facebook had shifted to groups because they had received a ton of negative press attention from the news feed, and articles that were wrong were going unchecked across the platform from, as you know, we're all alive back then, 2014 to about 2017. And they made a dramatic algorithm shift. And that algorithm shift was to put an emphasis on people going to groups, whether they be private or public. Eventually, it became clear that it was more targeted towards really niche private communities, which was then framed as, we're going to fix fake news. Like, you won't have these fake news articles on your news feed. It won't be like that anymore. But it was very transparent at the time what was happening. They were putting the fake news behind a wall that journalists could not see. And they were letting those things proliferate. They were letting groups talk about how to arm up. They were letting groups recruit from more traditional spaces. Saying, basically brigading normal Facebook groups to bring people to extremist Facebook groups. And Brandy saw this at the time. I mean, the first question that we had for Facebook back then, which is 2 years ago now, was what? Like, are you doing the same checks that you were doing for the previous things? Like, are you using like the recommendations algorithm that's bringing people to bad spaces on YouTube, the recommendations algorithm that's bringing you bad news information on Facebook? Is that being used for the group's algorithm? And the answer was, I don't know, we'll get back to you on that. And they never did. And then we wound up with this much larger problem in the long run. So, at some point, as Joan said, this is a problem the platforms refuse to be accountable for. They also just don't, these companies don't come to us. They're furious at us for figuring this out. Like, it's not like we get some sort of award or lap or whatever. the arsonists that she was talking about are still on the loose. We are targeted by them personally because, we pointed out that they were causing fires and there was no justice system to get them. The arsonists are now saying, hey, look at that guy. He keeps pointing the finger at us. And then they have a much larger mob than they had before. And then, the companies that are allowing everything to be pillaged using their product hate us too. So we are, we are at the center of a very weird spot. And it's fine. Like, we're used to it. We're journalists. We didn't get into this because it's a popularity contest. But I would be remiss to say if it didn't totally, completely suck.
It's been a real week.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that. As a researcher, actually, you don't get into it thinking people are going to hate you for the work you do. But the other night I was listening to a fascist podcast and they were using my name and they were talking about the research that I do. And they were talking about a few other women in this field. And the one thing, when you listen and hear something like that and your name comes up, the first thing you listen for is, do they know my address? Do they know where I live? Right. And it's just like, it's heartbreaking to see it happen over and over and over again to so many different kinds of people across the globe. And then, know that the other part of the problem, I think, is that that other people are making extremely good salaries for covering up and for making this stuff a non-issue, right? And so it's a difficult situation to be in, especially as I think we're now at least in a moment where there is a policy window. That, Brandy, you're reporting on groups was instrumental at helping everybody else understand what the problems were going to be and what lied ahead. And we did see them very recently say that they're going to walk back political groups and make those recommendations more, less prevalent in their algorithms. And all I thought was, cool, they're just going to name it Disney World Fun Club, like, the white supremacists that live around Boston use Super Happy Fun America as their Facebook group, right? And so it's not the case that you can just say, oh, well, we're going to do these one things and then not devote resources to the problem. And at the same time, we need government to get involved here and just to make sure that human rights violations, civil rights violations, scams, hoaxes, all that kind of harm that we would insist other industries not perpetrate, we need that now.
I was just thinking, some of our polling with Gallup last year found that, there's people definitely recognize the implications of this kind of content being allowed to spread online, but they also don't really there's basically broad ambivalence among the public about what exactly to do about it and who should be responsible for doing it. Like, people basically don't trust the government to say yay or nay to content. They also don't think the companies themselves have a very good track record in this arena. And so I'm curious, like, what how can we do this? How can tech companies deal with this problem in a way that that has legitimacy both among their users, among their shareholders, and that also satisfies the kind of current legislative and regulatory constraints?
I think we get this question a lot, right? Like, well, what is the answer? What is the solution? And I think it's sort of based on this false premise that, like, they haven't built something terribly dangerous and bad that harmed a large majority of their users. So, like, how do you walk that back? I think the scale is, for Facebook, too big. Like they're just, the scale is too large. Their content moderators are outsourced, underpaid, and not provided enough training or know-how to understand their like ridiculous 10,000 word community standards, which no one can follow. Even their like Supreme Court is trying to figure out just what these people are talking about in this like hodgepodge of rules that are sort of, and we've seen how they've rolled out the rules. They've rolled out the rules because of public pressure and because of journalists writing stories that put public pressure on them. So they say, oh, in 2019, okay, we're going to reduce anti-vaccination content, and that's going to be put in our rules. And then there's a measles outbreak in Samoa and a bunch of kids die. And, you know, Robert F. Kennedy, one of their big users, is over there waving a flag and making real life contacts. And so they say, oh, well, we should probably do a little bit more. And so they make one more baby step of regulation or enforcement. And that's just the story of, that's the story of every platform, is tiny baby steps of enforcement. And so to say, what's the solution means that one, there is a solution, which I can't see there being one. And two, that the tech companies give a damn about putting that, any enforcement that might actually do something in place, because that would probably mean kicking a whole lot of people off the platform and making a whole lot of rules, and not just having a blank slate where anybody can do whatever the hell they want to, but curating a healthy environment for people on their platform, treating it like their house and saying, no, I don't want crazy conspiracy theorists here of all sorts. And I'm going to decide what that person is with a group of, you know, people that the users all trust. I don't know how you do that. I just know that I don't think it's going to happen because nobody cares about it happening.
Yeah, I will say I agree with Brandy. We have a problem with that. The foundation is broken, right? We have built post facto rules and infrastructure upon a very rotten idea, and you know, basically, you know, the internet is it's an arcade machine that it's a vengeance machine. You know, it spits out vengeance as tickets, and it, for tokens, it's just fear. You put in as much fear as possible. And you also get, over the course of it, the dopamine hits of playing the game, and it brings you identity as well. You know, you're playing a game of vengeance where you get identity in return. That is the case with Facebook and Twitter. You are constantly confronted with problems that need solving. And the biggest problems, the most sensational problems get to your face first. And those problems don't have to be true, they have to be based in reality. You're also confronted with now calls to action, with solutions to those problems. And they tend to be solutions that are way too simple and therefore nativist or racist, sexist, or, you know, otherwise they target groups of people. That's the problem, is we've built those machines all throughout the internet. And I don't know if there's going back from that. I would like to think that there is some sort of regulation that could fix that or tone it down. But we are seeing the outcome of that. We are seeing the outcome of a decade of this stuff. I want to tell a really quick story. I did used to work in tech. I was a very early employee at Hulu, where I was one of the only people who did not know how to code there. And deep, dark secret about Hulu early on was that everything on the front page of the website was manually curated. Actually, everything pretty much on the entire website was manually curated. Which sounds insane. Now everything's algorithms, and you get the most like niche cooking Netflix show if you watch 2 episodes of Great British Bake Off or whatever. But that was not the case at the time. And we had a problem because people were coming to Hulu because they assumed porn would be there. And that made sense. We were a video website. So they would just type in sex into the top. They would just type in the word sex, like an 8-year-old would do if they're trying to find pornography. So they would go to the search box, type in sex. And because of that, we had a most popular thing that was the only algorithmically generated thing on the homepage. And the top of it was a B movie that we got for no money whatsoever called Strictly Sexual. Like, we had first run Office, like The Office and Parks and Rec and 30 Rock from the night before. And didn't matter. Every day, the top of the thing would be a B movie that I don't think aired on actual television that we got the rights to because we needed it early on, called Strictly Sexual. And there were meetings about this. I was in these meetings and they were like, what do we do? What happens with Strictly Sexual? It was a big deal. We don't want to piss off this distributor, but like, we can't, this is not indicative of what this website is. And I remember my boss, Rebecca Harper, who ran this website, at one point she just said, like, guys, we run a website. We just run a website. I know you guys think you're saving the world and we're ridding the world of these horrific, awful cable companies, and we are. Eventually they're going to go down. But guess what? We run a website. Just remove the thing from the page. So we didn't have a most popular section anymore. And that was it. Nobody cared. Nobody noticed. There was no culture war over Strictly Sexual. Nobody, the president wasn't like on his phone complaining all morning about how they took Strictly Sexual off Hulu. But it was gone. And then the company got bigger and better, and everyone liked the site more. But by the way, I'm sure it's still on Hulu right now. You can go watch Strictly Sexual if you type in sex into hulu.com. So there are solutions to this, but we have to have a regular conversation that isn't about insane screeching over things that aren't really censorship.
And you raised, go ahead, Joe.
Can I just jump in for a second and just say, I feel both of your, issues here, because, one of the things that I try to explain to people often when we think about technology is that we think about it as a product. We don't understand that it's actually a process. And in doing so, temporary fixes often cause much bigger problems. And so the important thing to understand about this moment that we're in is that these technologies are always going to shapeshift. They're always going to try to find their user base. They're always going to try to optimize for profit. And the role that other, stewards of society, or what sociologists call social institutions, should play then is helping those industries develop in a way that is safe, which includes, to my mind, would include limits on, if you are going to be serving 1 million people as part of your tech product, then you have to have a content moderation plan that helps, protect users against malicious disinformation, as well as hate and harassment. Just like you need you're supposed to have a plan about kids getting access to Strictly Sexual. But of course, there never has been one on the net. So there's got to be other ways in which information can be handled. But this is the problem, I think, also with decision making, which is when you have to make a decision, it's because you have to disappoint some other people, right? And so we have to really think about, who is going to be disappointed by this decision versus also, I guess not versus, and also who might be harmed or unfairly targeted by this. So those are the kinds of things you weigh when you make a decision. But for tech companies, because the motive is profit, it's often not, who are we making happy other than the shareholders? And then downstream of that is, who are we harming? Do they even have a representative voice, loud enough to come for us? And usually we don't, right? And so that's why I've spent the last 6 months working with civil society groups on figuring out what else can be done about disinformation that doesn't involve going to tech companies and asking politely for them to stop allowing people to organize in our city that want to kill us, and so it's really important that we understand that the tech companies, to Brandy's point, have built something that is uniquely dangerous and, to Ben's point, could be managed with better managers.
You've all three kind of raised the specter of perverse incentives. Obviously, profit is driving a lot of the decisions being made by many of the companies. But I'm curious to know where you see opportunity to shift incentives in a more positive direction. Are are there examples that you've seen in in your work that kind of point us in a helpful direction, both directions that private industry could take, but also directions that our kind of social and democratic institutions could take?
I mean, I think that there's, to Joan's point and to Ben's, I guess, and I think not waiting for anybody to save us, right? Like users have to save themselves. So whether that's, increased digital literacy, just better sort of social media habits that start with us. There's the very popular idea that like disinformation is like a polluted environment, and we all have to take responsibility for our efforts in that, or our piece in that polluted ecosystem, right? So I recycle. I will also try to not post or watch what I post, right? Or share content, or be empathetic to people who are sharing, junk news sites, and try to understand and work that way. That doesn't change the fact that ExxonMobil is still the leading, is still dumping slush in our backyard. But like, I'm going to do what I can do, and it's going to start in my backyard. And I think, the ability, like Reddit's a good example. They have their issues, but they do moderation pretty well. They have built a lot of like lively, interesting communities on that site. Twitter's trying out something called Birdwatch right now, where users will sort of self-monitor misinformation and disinformation. It has a host of problems already right now. It's like just a platform for bashing me and other journalists, but like it's trying. We can be harsh on platforms, but those sort of creative fixes or creative endeavors that put power back in the hands of users, I find that to be something that I can get as excited as I'm going to get about this sort of stuff. But that it's something.
Yeah, I agree with Brandy. And the reason there's hope is because more people are being affected by this. So many people reach out on a day-to-day basis now saying, like, what are my tools? Like, my mom has this horrific conspiracy thing going on, and it's making it so she's not wearing a mask and she's going to die from this. How do I stop this? So, we've talked to people who've had family members die because they loved QAnon so much they wouldn't wear a mask, and they had pre-existing conditions. They got into a hospital and they died. So people want to know answers. People are jarred into reality who are very offline and confronting very online people in real spaces now. So because of that, there's going to be necessarily there will be this market gap that will get filled up, hopefully with good players here who want people like Joan, who want good and better guidebooks and solutions to how to fix this stuff. So that is my hope. There is a future of kids who want to get good information and value it for the first time in a while. And there is a reason to be hopeful.
I hate to show up and be doomologist over here, but part of me is very wary of systems that are built on top of broken systems that ask people to do free work for the enrichment of a corporation that is by and large not giving back at the ratio, to pun intended here, that they should be, right? And a system that doesn't talk back to society in many ways. You've seen the tech oligarchs pulled in front of Congress, and they, shake their heads and say, I don't know how that could have happened. We pay the fact checkers to deal with that. I don't know how Daily Caller could have ended up as a fact checker. And I'm like, how can I know, sitting in my, office at home, and you don't know, and you're making billions, and I'm over here. I make good money. I'm not going to lie. I work at Harvard. They take care of me. I got a nice sweater on today, but I'm not complaining, in that way. But I'm saying specifically, I don't want my job to exist. I don't think this is a good use of researchers' time. I don't think it's a good use of philanthropists' money. And everybody else is just propping up a system that is run by, at best charismatic individuals, and at worst, people who are obsessed with power, because you don't get this rich without being obsessed with power in many ways. And so for me, it's like, if you build, supplemental complementary tech, but the real goal of these platforms is actually to get to social banking, they don't care about social media. They don't care about journalism. They don't care about public health. They don't care about elections. Those are all things that happen around the thing they care about, which is this very egoistic driven pursuit of building the biggest thing that they can build, and growing and growing and growing at any cost. I say that saying this other thing, which if I do have hope to lend, it's because I know librarians exist. I married one, which is wonderful. Brandy's also trained in the dark arts of information science, right? There are people and industries out there that can help, that aren't obsessed with data at any cost, that aren't trying to make things bigger, but are trying to make things contextual. And that's what librarians do, is they help you understand the context in which you're arriving into information. Even like the most basic of bookstores have a fiction and a nonfiction section. Like, if we even just started there, there's some really great ways in which the folks on Reddit have been tagging coronavirus information as it comes into their message boards and their communities, and it helps everybody else sort out what it is that they're looking at. And so I think that as we, embark on a future of a public interest internet, we have to measure that with, well, what are the other sectors, the other professional sectors, people who are paid to do work that could be at the forefront of reorganizing the world's information? Because the current organization of the world's information on Google is not so good. And, why don't we start there? Why don't we give that a go for a little while and try to figure out how to build the technology around an information environment where you can have, a little bit of entertainment as a treat. I joke. You can have a ton of bogus, false,
More cat
fun
memes.
content. Yeah, you can have more cat memes, but you got to have a steady drip of timely, local, relevant, and accurate information. And that doesn't happen with the system as it's built. It happens when they decide there's a big Band-Aid that needs to be built, that needs to be put on a broken system during the pandemic. But that should lead us to learn exactly what is broken about the system as it's designed, and then we can move forward. But there is something about the authenticity of the conversations that need to happen that aren't happening by and large, because these companies refuse to take any kind of responsibility.
It sounds like you all have a pretty good sense of job security for the time being, for better or worse. And
that's so depressing.
So I'll both
hey,
apologize
listen.
to you.
I would love to write a book about Stephen King and all of his crazy ideas about technology. I'm a technophile. Like, I love technology. Like, this is why it's so painful to do this work, because I am like a real nerd. Like, I'm the kid that was taking apart VCRs.
Joan, I keep thinking about this. Like, I think we all came at it from this place, right? Where I got out of the woods, literally the woods, Massachusetts, because of the internet. And I love it deeply because of it. It brought me to New York. I was like, oh, weirdos, finally. Like, this is great. And I didn't know that was possible until the internet existed. I just didn't know. And, that I'm not sure the internet is like that for kids right now. I think it is on TikTok a lot, and there, you can find your own space. to know that there is a world outside of your area. But you have to wade through a lot of bad first. You have to wade through a lot of hate to get to your little community. I didn't have to do that. Like, the hate that I had to wade through was in real life when I was growing up. So I think that's the thing. We all want to make it so we can feel welcomed somewhere. And that's what we want the internet to be again. I think that's why we care so much about this thing.
I think Facebook should just be plant hobbyist groups. Like, that's my big plan to solve the problem, because those are great. They're great.
They're gonna be, it's going to be the best yard sale website the world has ever seen. According to my younger brother, who pretty much only uses Facebook Marketplace. He's like, Joni, I don't know why my friends are all crazy, but I just, saw this really cool lamp. I'm like, all right, bro. Like, go get that lamp from, 15 blocks away.
All right. Well, I think we're now at time. So I want to say a quick word of thanks to Joan, to Ben, and Brandy for joining us for this conversation. And on behalf of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, thank you for joining. Take care.